This program is made possible by the loyal financial support of the friends and partners of Family Policy Institute.
You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world.
Good evening and welcome to Salt and Light. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we have a very interesting program for you because we're going to be talking about the issue of prostitution. Now recently the South African Law Reform Commission released their report on adult prostitution. This happened on the 26th of May. Now the Law Reform report on prostitution is a 7-year study that was conducted in South Africa, taking submissions from thousands of South African citizens, respected institutions, a lot of research, working with organizations and actually prostitutes on the streets. And their report, the final result of that report is a recommendation to government to keep the sex industry criminalized with state-assisted exit programs to help women exit the sex industry. So to help me talk through the report and some of the claims made by pro-prostitution groups that decriminalization is the only way for South Africa to go, I've invited Madri Bruwer of Straatwerk into the studio. Madri, welcome to the program and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Errol. Privilege being here.
Our second guest is Lerato from Victory Ministries International or Victory Outreach, and their ministry works to take women off the street out of prostitution with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So Lerato, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, sir. It's a privilege being here.
So we were talking about the report and the report's recommendation that government keep the sex industry totally criminalized, which is what it is now. But they add that exit programs must be introduced by government, I suppose working with NGOs and civil society to help the woman escape the exploitation and abuse that is inherent in the sex industry. Do you agree, Madri, with that report, that recommendation, and why do you agree with it?
Errol, I really believe that the people from the Commission really looked at those, I think, 2,600 and something reports and was really open to see the truth and to find what is in people's hearts and what the truth about this industry is. So I truly believe that it should stay criminalized, and definitely that there should be an option for women wanting to exit prostitution, and that it should be done very tailor-made to what they need. At the same time, that it will help them to reintegrate into society, because that's where they belong. We all need each other.
Are you saying this from a basis of understanding prostitution, understanding the sex industry and what happens with women in the sex industry? Your ministry, Straatwerk, you work, and just tell us how long you've been working on the streets, taking women out of prostitution, reaching them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. How long you've been doing that?
So the organization has been going for a bit more than 50 years. I've been there since 95.
1995. So you've been there a long time, and you've seen a lot, and you've experienced a lot. So you're not buying the arguments from pro-prostitution groups that decriminalizing the entire sex industry is what is going to help the woman, protect them, protect their dignity, protect them from abuse and exploitation, all of those issues. You don't believe that decriminalization is the answer?
No, Errol, I know there's many angles we can take on this, but one that we've talked about before is the ladies truly don't want to be there. So we're saying we're not doing them a favor by saying it's their right to stay there while they don't want to be there. They need to be helped to exit. And truly the damage that prostitution causes emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, in every way of their lives, every aspect of their lives, is just incredible. I think it's difficult to even fathom if one doesn't see it happen in people whom you love.
That contrasts with Sweat's arguments. You know, Sweat and other pro-prostitution groups have slammed this report by the Law Reform Commission, saying it's moralizing. It doesn't take into account all the facts. I think it does, because we made a submission to the Law Reform Commission on this issue. We looked at a lot of research, Germany, the Netherlands, parts of Australia, And we found that whenever they legalize or decriminalize, that the abuse and the exploitation doesn't go away. In fact, it increases. And so if that happened in first world countries, I'm trying to imagine what would happen in South Africa. But you understand, and you're working with the women, and what pro-prostitution groups are saying is, these women, it's their bodies, and they have a right to do with their bodies what they want. And this is the way they earn money and income to take care of their families, so they have the agencies. It is their right, and they want this right to be able to sell their bodies to make money for themselves. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Let me just say two things before I comment. The one is, I don't think they really want the right. And then also, I think people that's arguing and debating, I do believe that there's in this whole group of people a desire to somehow help. But I think we have a responsibility from the perspective we have to say, you know, if we are pro the woman, it's different than being pro prostitution. Prostitution is an institution that you can somehow say, how can one make that safer? How can you get structure to it? Or, how should you do the legislation? But if you say we're pro the woman or the men or the children, say what is the best for them? And prostitution can never be the best for anybody in any circumstance. And again, there's so many arguments, but prostitution doesn't make money, it moves money around. So if we really care, let's move it where it's needed without abusing the people and then having further damage in everybody involved.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Get the money to where it's actually needed, and that is exit programs to help women get out of it, because it isn't a choice to get into prostitution, is it? It's a lack of choices that forces women into prostitution.
I think that's a very good question and something one should really talk about, because there's an element of choice. But one of the things that the Law Reform Commission get right so well is they're saying it's so limited, they're so broken, they're so making the choice in that context is very different than if you have 20 wonderful choices. So they're needy, and there's so much pressure and coercion that the lady in that situation are exposed to this choice more than she's given the option.
Lerato, I want to bring you in here. You've been on the streets as a prostitute. You at Victory Ministries now for 1 year. You've been off the streets. Tell me, how long have you been on the streets?
I've been on the streets since from November 2015 till June 2016. And I decided to come into the Victory Outreach Recovery Home on the 20th of June 2016.
Okay, so how did you get into prostitution?
For me, it was all about looking for a place of belonging, and nobody forced me to be part of prostitution or to go and sell my body or to smoke drugs. It was all my choice, but it was because I needed a sense of belonging, which was what I never had in my life. And
so how did you get that sense of belonging? Did a pimp take you in? Were you part of a group?
What actually motivated me to get involved into prostitution was my drug addiction.
So you needed money, you needed to earn money to support your drug habit, so you went into prostitution.
Yes.
Madri, do you see that a lot on the streets when you work with prostitutes?
Yeah, there's a lot of addiction, part of prostitution, also drug addiction, and often the question is asked, so were you first in drugs and then you started prostituting, or the other way around? And the Law Reform Commission does very well in explaining that somehow that's an academical question. So I think the way you asked it is more appropriate. Is it part of it? Yes, definitely. Not all the ladies are addicted to drugs, but many are, and it's part of the whole scene of prostitution.
Okay, Lerato, back to you. So the Law Reform Commission's report on prostitution, adult prostitution, is saying that it should be kept criminalized, and there should be exit programs by the state to help women get out of prostitution. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Pro-prostitution groups are saying that is not good for women. It exacerbates the harm and increases the harm and the exploitation of prostitutes by keeping it criminalized. If you decriminalize the entire sex industry, that means the brothel owners, the pimps, all become legitimate business people. They're not criminals any longer. And that prostitutes are legitimate business people making a living. They call it, sex work. It's just work. And if you decriminalize, you're going to solve a lot of the problems and the harms and the exploitation that is in the sex industry. Do you agree with that, having been there for the time that you have?
I disagree with that because in my experience in the streets, not only the abuse, not only the drug addiction, because some of the girls come not even knowing how to smoke, not even addicted to even cigarette, but they are being forced to do things. So I believe that by legalizing prostitution, it's gonna be like more harmful to many girls, and majority of the girls that I know, of the girls that I've been with, not only here but also in Bloemfontein where I come from, a majority of the girls, they started at a very young age. So at this moment, they are very tired of doing that, but they feel that there is no way out. They feel hopeless.
And decriminalizing the sex industry is not going to solve that problem.
It's not.
It's going to keep them there.
It's even going to make it worse.
Why will it make it worse?
Because it's going to make them feel like there's a sense of freedom in that, which is not true, because once you can only feel that freedom once you are smoking, once you are high. But once that drugs goes out of your body, then you become sober again, then the regrets comes back to your mind, and it's not a nice life, the loneliness and...
Madri, this argument that pro-prostitution groups make that decriminalization of the sex industry is going to solve a lot of the problems and challenges that women are facing. How do you think they arrive at that conclusion?
Errol, I think there's a few things. The one is that not being there and not having experienced it, and not knowing the immense impact, not only while the lady is on the street, but even after exiting. And that process of healing, which is beautiful, but it's such a long journey. I think that's the one. And then you get people who's been in it, who advocate for it, which I think these groups often base their argument on. Niazoi organization in Greece has a sad but such a true quote where they say, to survive prostitution, you have to kill hope. Now, to stand there without hope, then you feel desperate. So when somebody feels, I've tried to exit, but it doesn't work, or, I'm just not good for anything else or whatever, but you're standing there without hope. The only hope then, which is empty, is that somehow this will get better. This does never get better. It just gets worse. So again, I don't think that people has evil intentions, but somehow it's built on a hopeless scenario.
A hopeless scenario. And that's what prostitution is. It gives people a sense of hopelessness, and that's why we need to help them to exit the sex trade and not legitimize it, because legitimization of the sex trade only helps the pimps, the brothel owners, and the criminal enterprises that prey on vulnerable women and children. More with Madri and Lerato after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. We're talking about prostitution, and in particular the report from the South African Law Reform Commission on adult prostitution. This report was released on the 26th of May, and it recommends to the Department of Justice to keep prostitution in South Africa criminalized, but added that we need state-assisted exit programs to help women exit the sex trade. So we're speaking to Madri and Lerato about these issues. Madri working for years on the street with Straatwerk, reaching women with the gospel of Jesus Christ, taking them out of prostitution and transforming their lives. Lerato has been a prostitute on the streets, had been out of the sex industry for about a year, and she's with Victory Outreach Ministries, a ministry that does incredible work reaching gangsters, prostitutes with the gospel of Jesus Christ and transforming their lives like only the gospel can. So Madri, one of the issues that the Law Reform Commission report deals with and to ask the question, is prostitution decent work? Because there's a whole push by pro-prostitution groups that prostitution is sex work. It's just work like any other work. And women need the right and the legal right to use their bodies, to sell their bodies and to make money, because it's just work like any other work. So they've come up with this name, sex work. Now the report, Law Reform report says they refuse to call it sex work. They prefer using the word prostitution because they say it will obviously legitimize prostitution by calling it sex work, and it is not decent work. But what is your views on whether prostitution is actually decent work?
So Errol, I think the word decent is what I would first like to comment on, because we know the ladies are decent. So this work is not decent for them. Work intrinsically has to be something that builds you up, something that gives you hope, something to help build the identity that you have, which the Lord put inside of us. So in prostitution, doing that, it breaks you down. We've heard what Lerato shared and we've read in the report. And something that has just caught my attention is when it's used as, we use the labor model, there's no motivation why we say it's a decent job. But when we look at all the definitions, for all the worldwide organizations that gives definitions, it doesn't fit in there. So somehow we say, if we use the labor model, we're not willing to discuss this. This is just our model. So somehow we have to say the intrinsic value of a person determines what is decent work. So that's why not one woman, man or child belongs in prostitution.
Okay, so this argument between prostitution, the word, or sex work, what pro-prostitution groups argue is stigma. It's stigma that harms the woman. And prostitution has a certain stigma, and that's why they want to use sex work to help people feel better about themselves. But all the research I've seen, proves that it is the prostitution, the work of prostitution, that harms the woman and not the name of prostitution. So whether you change the name, you call it something else, what women are doing, they have to continue doing, and that's what essentially harms them. Do you agree?
Yes, no, totally, Errol.
Yeah, so it's the prostitution that harms the woman, it's not the stigma. You can't remove stigma from what women are forced to do in the sex industry. Lerato, would you agree?
Yes, I do.
Errol, if I can just comment on that, it is sadly true for people looking at women involved in prostitution. Whatever you feel, however you think about them, you will think it whatever prostitution or somebody involved in it is called. But it's also true of the ladies. It's not changing how they think about themselves, because they experience what they experience and they live in the reality that they're living in.
Okay, next we're going to go to the health issues, because this is a big issue. In South Africa, when it comes to the sex industry, we find rates of HIV/AIDS very, very high amongst prostitutes. And pro-prostitution groups again argue that it's because of criminalization. It's because it's criminalized, the woman can't go for health checks and all these kind of things. And I can't follow that logic, why a woman cannot go to a clinic and get a health check if she's a prostitute, because it's not stamped on her forehead. She doesn't have to say she's a prostitute. She can go for health checks. But that's one of the excuses they make. And another thing they say is that we've got to get the woman to go for health checks, but the report picks this up, is that women go for health checks, but the men that buy, the Johns that buy women for sex, they don't go for health checks. Do you see any sense in that?
Also struggling to follow the argument there that they put on the table. Just commenting on a lady can go. I think often it becomes evident that the lady's in prostitution because of all the damage, and the health professional sees that. But again, whatever that person in that profession sees and how they respond to that person is because of their own feeling towards this lady. And I like the suggestion of having certain protocol and having people know exactly how to deal with people. But it's again, if you think of them as a decent person that you want to serve, then anyway you take that angle on that conversation and the service that you provide.
Lerato, do you think it's possible to protect the health and welfare of women in prostitution while they're busy in prostitution? Is it possible to protect the health and welfare?
For me, I think it comes from a personal decision, because even if the clinics are always there, they are always open, but it's a personal decision that a person must make, whether the person is going to go for checkup or not. And it goes back to that sense of hopelessness, that you lose hope in everything. Like for me, I never went, it's only when I went to the recovery home that I went to the clinic and made...
But while you were a prostitute, while you were on the street, was there anything preventing you from going to a clinic for a checkup? No. Even though it's criminalized? So decriminalization is not going to change anything. You say it's the women themselves.
Yeah, it has to come from a person. Like personally, it has to come from you if you really want to do it.
And then there's also in the report that men, the buyers of sex, would pay prostitutes more money not to use a condom. Did you see that happen in the sex industry?
Yeah, it's true.
It is true.
Yes.
So whether they go for health checks or not, if you're not checking the men as well, and men are paying women more not to use a condom, the entire health issue becomes a non-issue.
Yeah.
Errol, if I just can comment, it's been bothering me through the years, and then in the report they write about it too, say, well, a checkup doesn't prevent you from getting the virus or other STD. It doesn't, you will just then know you have it, but it doesn't protect you.
Exactly.
And I think some of the ladies, I mean, they're clever, they're beautiful people. I think they register that. It's not going to prevent it if I get checked. I can get checked every week, but it's not going to prevent.
And they don't have to advise the buyer of sex, that they have a STD or anything. So this can be spread. If a report we saw in 2009 is the majority of men that buy sex from prostitutes are married men. So, if you try to consider the implications of this, if married men are sleeping with prostitutes, paying them not to use a condom, picking up an STD and then taking that home to their wives, what the implications are, because you can't manage this thing. You cannot, they say there's 100,000 prostitutes on the street in South Africa. How is our health sector that is already struggling with just basic issues, and our law enforcement that is riddled with mismanagement and corruption and all kinds of issues, how are they going to manage this issue? Do you think it's possible, Madri?
I think the system, anyway, as you say, will struggle, but also trying to give that, that you can enforce this, that, man should use a condom or whatever the discussion could be. There's so many reasons. We're back at the hopelessness. Later, what does it matter anyway? Or a lady is drugged so much that, that negotiations doesn't take place anymore. So, I mean, in the industry, whether it's decriminalized or whatever the legal status is, the system struggles with it and the individual struggles with it because of so many reasons. So in prostitution, we have to be honest that any sexually transmitted disease, and for that matter, other sicknesses too, or illnesses are being spread. It's just it's the nature of prostitution. Yeah. That's the reality.
And the evidence supports that. The high incidences of STDs and HIV/AIDS amongst prostitutes tell us that this is a high-risk industry and you cannot manage it, you cannot bring it down. And changing the legal status of prostitution from, whether it's legalized, partially decriminalized, decriminalized completely, any of those things do not impact on the health issues. The health issues remain because of the nature of prostitution. We also want to talk about exploitation and abuse, Lerato, because this comes up a lot in the discussions of prostitution, and the argument is that if it's legal, if it's decriminalized, you're going to remove a lot of the abuse and the exploitation because the police will go in there. But But then we get other reports. It's that a lot of the police are committing the abuse. Are you aware of this? Did you see that?
From my experience, I haven't. Only from the pimps and some of the clients, yeah.
So the abuse come from clients and the pimps as well. What do the pimps do?
The pimps are like, they don't give you a day off. You can't sleep in their house if you didn't go work that night. You can't eat if you didn't go. So it's like, it's a force. It's like everything that you have to do is by force.
Okay.
So, which is also abuse. Some they get beaten. Some, I've seen it in the same house where I was staying. Some they will be beaten. Some they will be like forced to like go out and sleep with those people. And there was this girl that a pimp took to a house, and the guy, which was the client, he had a snake in his house. So you can imagine how the girl was feeling.
Now here's the argument that pro-prostitution groups make. They say when you decriminalize prostitution, and these pimps all come from a criminal background. It's part of criminality. It's part of the criminal underworld. And we've seen, you know, reports from Germany, from parts of Australia and New Zealand, that when you legalize or decriminalize prostitution, the links between the criminal underworld and prostitution is never broken. So the question I want to ask you, Lerato, is that if you decriminalize prostitution in South Africa, would all these pimps become good people overnight? Would they all obey the law?
Never.
Why do you say that?
If they couldn't obey the law when they were like under pressure, what will make them to obey the law when they have the freedom to do everything they want to do?
Absolutely. So the legal status does not change prostitution. That is clear. The abuse, the exploitation inherent in prostitution, in the sex industry, remains regardless of the legal status. We want to talk more about exploitation, abuse. Is prostitution a moral issue? And has the Law Reform Commission dealt with it as a moral issue? These are the questions that we need to talk about. So more after the break with Madri, Lerato, and we're going to have Micky, Meji, a former employee of Sweat, join us to talk about this issue. So don't go away. Welcome back to the program. We're talking about the South African Law Reform Commission report on adult prostitution, and their recommendation is to keep the sex industry criminalized in South Africa, but with exit programs to help women exit the sex trade. Joining us in the studio now is Micky, Meji, who is with an organization called Embrace Dignity. Of course, you're familiar with Madri, Bruwer of Straatwerk. So Micky, welcome to the studio and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Micky, you've seen the report by the South African Law Reform Commission, and they're recommending a number of things. They deal with a number of things. But before we go to the report, I'd like you to give us just a brief background of yourself.
Like I'm Micky Meji, as you know, and I've survived prosecution myself, and taking it from that angle, knowing that it's not a choice that people just make all of a sudden one day to just decide to do prosecution, but it's circumstances, and it's usually mostly coerced by clients. As I know in my situation that it was, initiated and coerced by a sex buyer. I wouldn't want to give them the glory of calling them clients because they are not. But I've also worked for Sweat, and at the time that I worked at Sweat, seemingly, even for myself and many other people that are still working there, it would be a way out, and it's basically you are told what to say, or basically only decriminalization is introduced, and of nothing else except for decriminalization. So having worked at Sweat, but I came to a realization some 5 years ago that they are not really concerned about the people that are affected by prosecution, but rather they have their own agenda to push. And I would want to say confidently at this stage that they want to deliver to the funders what the funder is expecting to hear in terms of reaching numbers and and in terms of the human rights violations documentation. It's about targets. It's about meeting targets. And right now I am with Embrace Dignity. I'm not sure how much people know about Embrace Dignity, but Embrace Dignity is a human rights organization that seeks to abolish prosecution. And I agree fully with that. And that sees prosecution as exploitation of women and it's inherently harmful. And I also agree with that as well. But I'm the program associate for survivor initiatives, and I direct the Survivor Empowerment and Support Program, which seeks to empower and support women who wish to exit prosecution. And I'm also helping set up the survivor movement called Kwanele, which now has about 700 women in membership in 5 provinces: Limpopo, Mpumalanga, KZN, Eastern Cape, and the Western Cape.
Wonderful. And it's interesting that you call yourself a survivor of prostitution, that you managed to exit the sex trade, but you survived. But Micky, I want to talk about the report, and then secondly, the response to the report. Now, the report was released on the 26th of May by the Law Reform Commission of South Africa, and it took 7 years for them to make that study. They received submissions from organizations all over the country and from thousands of citizens, and they made the recommendation. I know you don't agree with all of it, but the response to the report was very interesting by Sweat, by their allies, and they attacked it, saying that it's the modelizing of one person. I've seen in their documentation. They also say that they never take everything into account. That's why they're making the kind of findings they are. And their argument then is basically decriminalization is the only way for South Africa to go. And the reason they say this is because there's a lot of exploitation, as you know, harm, abuse of women, and to eradicate all of those things, you decriminalize the entire sex industry. So the brothel owners, the pimps, all the people involved become legitimate businessmen. Then you can regulate the industry properly. Now, you being in prostitution for a number of years, do you believe that is true? Is it workable? Can this be done?
It actually doesn't make sense. And having spoken to people in the only country in the world that has decriminalized, so-called, New Zealand, when I went there in 2011, of course, through Sweat, women who worked in prosecution prior to decriminalization and worked after decriminalization actually told me that they had moved from working in the streets after decriminalization because they felt they were still not protected from the clients. They would still be alone with the client in the bush or wherever in an isolated area, and the client could do basically whatever it is that they wanted to do. So they decided to work in brothels and indoors, which now brings me to the conclusion that the interests of Sweat and their allies are not that of the people who are affected by prosecution, but rather for the pimps and the brothel owners, because then what that tells me is that the power of negotiation for women was then given to the pimps and the brothel owners, because now they were benefiting more from women who were in prosecution. So I totally disagree, and it doesn't make sense. How is this going to eradicate human rights violations? Because we have beautiful laws that protect women from even gender-based violence. But if you are alone with the perpetrator in your house, the law still does not just protect you.
Exactly.
So we are looking at things like that. But I'm particularly concerned by their insistence or their trashing of the South African Law Reform Commission's recommendation, especially with the diversion, because if they are, very clearly about the women and who are affected by prosecution, then everybody should welcome, they should welcome the fact that at least, even if the South African Law Reform Commission still, recommends continued criminalization, but there is a way out for women. And I'm particularly concerned why they would stand firm and say they don't want this. So what they actually mean is that we need to offer for the black poor girl and woman in South Africa as an alternative or as a way of making a living, prostitution, instead of also just, offering them other avenues. I would want to say maybe it's a choice if a person has had broader choices. So I'm not so sure why they would be arguing that. It doesn't make sense to me.
Madri, do you agree, you're working on the streets as well with these women, that if you decriminalize, you're going to empower the brothel owners, the pimps and the gangs that control the woman?
It makes a lot of sense. I agree with that. I think part of the challenge here is also that in enforcing certain laws obviously is also involved in this whole discussion. Because one would hope, that those guys would be caught, because they're actually also against the law if it's criminalized. Decriminalized would give them a lot of power then.
Yeah, over the woman.
Over the woman and in the whole system working in their benefit.
Yeah, because I've heard this said often, from reports from other nations, decriminalization is a gift to the pimps, to the brothel owners, to the organized crime. It does nothing for the woman. Micky, I want to come back to you. You're saying that what Sweat and their allies are pushing is the narrative of the people that are funding them. And so they're not necessarily interested in the woman, in what's happening here. So they tell decriminalization, they're going to push for that, regardless of what is actually happening in people's lives. They're getting the money and they're going to push for this. That's why they're so upset at what the Law Reform Commission has said, is because, we're being funded to do a job here and we didn't achieve what we got the money for.
My experience of working in the line of prosecution and law reform and advocacy, I know that there's a lot of money in decriminalization. I myself have tried to apply for some funding, and I was told that only if I am calling for decriminalization, I'll be given money. So I was left with either selling my soul or standing for what is right.
Okay.
And I've got this in email, in writing.
Is this from international organizations? Because I see Sweat's funding comes a lot from foreign organizations.
Yes, OSF will only fund organizations that are calling for decriminalization, and the Red Umbrella Fund will only fund Mama Cash, who says they fund women's rights organization. They will only fund, they've said this to me. I wrote to them and they gotten back to me and they told me only if I am promoting the decriminalization of prostitution, they will then give me money.
But the interest then can't be the woman and what was best for the woman. Because if you look at the research and the social data coming out about the harms of prostitution on women, decriminalizing the entire sex industry doesn't match up. So what you're saying is, the ideology is we have to decriminalize, and regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the truth, regardless of what is in the Law Reform Commission's report, all the truth and the facts there, we don't care about that. We just need to push for decriminalization, and we're giving our funding for that, and we'll give funding to anybody that is going to advance that agenda. Anybody comes and says, you know what, we don't think that is a great idea, it is harmful to the woman, then the money is cut off.
Yes. I have a theory of my own or a conclusion of my own. I sat down and I looked at this and I wanted to know what's in this for the funders as well. Because looking at it, if we have more people that are into prostitution because we've decriminalized, we have more people that are going to be affected by HIV. Where do we get our drugs and where are we getting all the condoms that we are distributing in the street? It's some sort of business making for people. I'm almost wanting to say that the funders actually have condoms businesses and also the drugs businesses. I'm not sure, but I'm just this is just trying to figure out what's in this or in all of this for them.
But it's your theory that the people may be pushing for decriminalization have a vested financial interest, and maybe the outcomes will be best for them. But I think the fundamental point here we all seeming to agree on is that the interest of the woman is not the primary focus here. It is not the interest of the woman. So when you look at, the Law Reform Commission put out the 4 options. It was keeping it criminalized, then it was decriminalization, partial decriminalization, and legalization. And they look even when we went through the workshop, we looked at these different, the key thing here was, how do we help the woman? How do we help the woman? And I think most people are saying that if you decriminalize or partial decriminalize or legalize, we're saying that we've got to find a way to help the women. I think the Law Reform Commission has come up with this. Keep it criminalized because we can keep law enforcement control over it because there's so much criminality in it, but you've got to have the exit programs. We've got to have exit programs to help women exit the sex trade, and there are many that want to exit, and that's been your experience.
Indeed so. Because of the woman's brokenness, it obviously is a long journey, because a lot of these ladies have, before entering, experienced so much trauma and so much deprivation. So yes, they want to exit, and that is a journey that needs a lot of support and just heart in it to come alongside the women. But you're right, there's so many ladies that wants to exit.
Yeah, so, and we want to talk about how do we do that, because it's easy to talk about exit programs, and if you look at how many women are trapped in the sex industry, and we have to talk about how many children are trapped in the sex industry, and nobody's talking about that, is what kind of exit programs do we implement to help women get out, and who does that? Is the government going to do that? Government maybe can fund that, but if you look at all the challenges government is facing currently with the corruption and mismanagement and all the other things that's happening, are they in a position to put a proper program in place to help women exit the sex trade? So we're going to talk more about that after the break with Madri and Micky, so don't go away. Welcome back to the program. I'm speaking to Micky, Meji and Madri Bruwer about the South African Law Reform Commission's report on adult prostitution. And so Micky, there's a lot of issues that the report deals with. It deals with health issues. Is prostitution decent work? It deals with exploitation and abuse. It deals with the moral issues, because they call it moralizing the criticism against the report. But I read through it, and I think it's a great report. It covers all the issues. It takes into account all the factors, looking at nations that have either decriminalized, partially legalized, and then looking at South Africa's unique circumstances. Now, we have unique circumstances, as you know, and you, Madri, in that we have high rates of poverty, high rates of unemployment, and high rates of abuse, sexual abuse against women and children. That is a reality in South Africa. I don't know if that is true in the Netherlands or in Sweden, or Germany. We can't make comparisons with those nations, because we are a unique nations and we have a unique set of circumstances. So we have to tailor our policy according to the circumstances in South Africa. And we know that there's so many women that have been forced into prostitution because of family dysfunction, abuse, poverty, all of the issues. The question is, how do we get them out? Exit programs, because the Law Reform Commission's report talks about that. So I want to ask you, have you thought about this? What kind of programs can we put in place to get women out of the sex trade?
Okay, so from the formation of CESP, which I felt was a need and a gap in the prostitution industry, the way I thought would work best is that it's not a one-size-fits-all, because not all women in prostitution are the same. Everyone is unique in their own way. So we need an individual response to an individual. So we might get a 28-year-old who only has matric. Situations that scenario is different from that of a 48-year-old who left school in standard 3, has no previous working experience, because then there would be something else that we need to do for that person. So basically I think we need to do some sort of not a survey, but we have to have intake forms of the women that we come across, so that we know who's who and who's where, so that we respond to that particular need at that particular time. Okay. Or we can respond to a group, but to such an extent. But in order for us to do a successful exit program, we need to respond to the individual, because not all women in prostitution are the same, have the same backgrounds. Like Madri had said before, that some of the women have experienced some sort of some trauma, and those traumas vary. Some people are survivors of rape, and some people have survived gender-based violence, domestic violence, etc. So we need to respond to the individual as per the need.
Okay, Madri?
I just want to say I totally agree about it has to be individual. The women are beautiful and beautifully different. And you know, Errol, the brokenness comes from relationships, and the healing needs to happen within the context of relationship. And we do need structure, and we do need a lot of wisdom, but I do believe that that agent of change and healing is the church. Everything is there that we need. And then drawing on the resources and coming alongside the woman in unique ways, seeing each individual, not as a phenomena, but as an individual.
Yeah, I tend to agree, because biblically, you know, if I look at this whole issue from a biblical perspective, it is the church's role to help women out of prostitution, help them with healing and transformation and all of those things, not the state. Because the state, when you ask the state to get involved with something like this, they create a bureaucracy, and we know that it just doesn't work. Things fall through the crack, there's lots of abuse, there's lots of corruption and all kinds of things that creep in when it becomes a huge state effort. But if the state would empower churches and NGOs to get involved, to, you know, that have the heart and the love and the compassion for the woman, I think we'll get the job done a lot more, because we understand, the NGOs understand, you understand, Micky, and so do you, Madri, what these women need. You know their background, you know their suffering, you know where they are, so you know how to deal with it. This is not just a list of, okay, ticking off and get the woman out the next and this and take them through that. There's a whole lot of issues, complex issues that you have to deal with. And I think the church is best positioned for that. But now, Micky, we're talking about adult prostitution, but the reality of child prostitution is still there. So we know from reports that we've seen over the past 10 years that there is a lot of child prostitutes on the street. And a lot of them are controlled by pimps. They're controlled by organized crime. And there's a demand for child prostitutes. And the reports I've seen is that when you decriminalize adult prostitution, child prostitution increase. Do you have any evidence of that?
I'm gonna want to agree with that. If you decriminalize adult prostitution, taking from the women that I work with, I could say almost 90% of them started in prostitution when they were 14 and 15.
Wow.
They might be 37 years old today, but they were 15, 14, and even some as young as 13 when they got into prostitution. So then I think it brings back again the argument around choice. Can a 15-year-old or 14-year-old choose to do prostitution?
And the law would say no. The law would say that is illegal for a child to make a choice to become a prostitute. So it has obviously criminalized child prostitution until 18 years old. So here's the question then. So a child comes into prostitution for whatever the circumstances at 14 and 15 and is abused and exploited and all of that. So at 18, you know, magically it's okay. Before that it wasn't okay. Now all of a sudden it's a choice at 18 years old. That doesn't make sense, and it can't make sense.
It doesn't actually, and also just decriminalization on its own. If you look at decriminalization, and I know that bill inside out because I was part of drafting it. It's a bill that just seeks to remove all the laws that are criminalizing prostitution and all the other aspects, and then just reinforcing the human rights laws that we already have. So now there is no regulation in that. People are free to sell and buy sex, and people are free to sell and buy other people, and people are free to exploit other people, and people are free to be exploited. And it just doesn't make sense because there is no control. Whereas, I mean, back in the day before I joined Straatwerk, I used to be for legalization because I thought at least there you are able to control. But this was before I understood that our law enforcement is so corrupt that even under regulation they might find ways of still, doing their corruption. So I think. For me, the Nordic model is the best. Is the best model because it offers the people. Why I'm actually against the report, the recommendation by the South African Law Reform Commission is the criminality aspect of the people who are bought, sold, and exploited. Because now you have to criminalize a person. Even if we were to try with a diversion program, if let's say we get this person to get a degree, but if they have a criminal record because of what they have been doing, then it's difficult to give them a job in the future. So
but they are recommending in the report that they would wipe out the criminal record as an incentive to women that want to leave the sex industry. They say, look, if you leave the sex industry, we're going to help you and we will wipe your your criminal record clean, so it helps you then to enter society as a...
I know what's going to happen there, and you might know this as well. Back in the day, J.P. Smith used to do brothel raids, and everybody who was in the brothel, for fear of getting arrested, would claim that they were trafficked. And then we had, an fluctuation of numbers of people who were trafficked, which was not very accurate because not everybody who was there was trafficked. Now, what will happen if we were to continue criminalizing with a diversion program and with an incentive for people who say they want to leave? Even when people were not ready, they would say they want to leave so that they can get their criminal records wiped off, and then they will still go back to the street so that the next time they are caught, there is no record of them being arrested in the first place.
And so, yeah, you're talking about having good policing.
Yes.
The policing is going to be so important for this, in whatever policy our government comes up with. And the problem is most people know that policing is a huge problem in South Africa. We cannot rely on our law enforcement agencies because of the high levels of corruption, mismanagement, and all the things that's happening at the moment. So we're really faced with a difficult situation here, Madri, and we need the wisdom of God. We truly do, because I think most people watching this program, most people in this country want to see the woman help, want to see women come out of exploitation and abuse. There's too much of that. They want to see children being helped and helped out of this thing because they're controlled by pimps, by organized crime. But how we do that? And so our government is going to be developing a policy. The South African government has to develop a policy on prostitution soon. And it's got to be a workable policy. It's got to achieve the objectives of getting the woman out, because as the Law Reform Commission says, we've got to get women out of the sex industry. That's the only way you can end the abuse. But who all needs to be part of this? Who all needs to come to the party to help? Because we, as the Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation, we're going to be having a workshop, 2-day workshop on the 18th and 19th of August to hammer out a policy. But we need the wisdom of God. What do you put in place to achieve all these objectives, to make sure that the law is upheld, that women are protected, that they can exit when they do, that the people, the pimps and the gangs that are preying on vulnerable women and children are prosecuted? How do we get that right, Madri?
Errol, I just want to respond to the picture that you painted. I think when in the report it says, we as South African Law Reform Commission wish that there could be a country without any prostitution. That would be the ideal, and I think we all agree on that. Yes. And somehow it feels to me, if we can see that picture, if that is what we work towards, then we're going to be clearer on what we're supposed to be doing. And to be honest, to think that people can exit and a miracle can sit here, it's a miracle that you're a survivor. It's a miracle that people become new and become productive citizens, not only surviving. So I just want to agree and say, to see that picture and to know what we should do, I think we should call the whole church to pray for much wisdom in the process of implementing it, because there's no way that guiding anybody out of prostitution is easy or simple. Every individual, again, as we said in the beginning, is unique. To get a strategy to handle that, I think we will be working with certain principles. And for that, it's good that we have people, that has lots of experience and that comes from certain government departments and all of that. But I want to say to every person that has a heart, you have something to bring to the table.
Yes.
And bring it.
Yes.
It's the time to bring it.
We need the media, we need government, we need the church, we need NGOs, we need all, even the business sector, to come together to deal with this program. Because somebody once said, the way you judge a nation, it's by the standards that they employ to protect women and children. How we protect the most vulnerable members of our society is how a nation is judged. And I think South Africa, on that scale, is losing very badly, because the exploitation and abuse of women and children are sky high in South Africa, and it's not going down. We're not winning the battle on that. And I think there's not enough political will in this country from all sectors. There's just not enough will to deal with the situation. And we can end sexual exploitation in South Africa. We can do it. But we need everybody to come together to do that. How can we sit by and just allow women and children to be abused, sexually abused and exploited every single day, and carry on with our lives like nothing is happening? We can't do that anymore. We can't do that any longer. There are answers and there are solutions. And people sitting here in the studio, Madri, Bruwer and Micky, Meji, are people that know and understand the issues, and I think they can help us a lot. There's a lot of women that have come out of prostitution that know the industry, that can give us critical advice and insight about what happens in the sex industry, and if we have that, we can find solutions for South Africa. So Madri and Micky, I want to thank you once again for coming into the studio and sharing your insights and your wisdom with us. We ask God to bless you in the work you're doing, to strengthen you so that you keep on fighting the good fight. So thank you. And to you, there's information on your screen now on how to get the report from the South African Law Reform Commission. Please make an effort to go to their website, download the form, read through it, even if you read the executive summary, but understand what is happening with prostitution in South Africa so you can speak with knowledge and insight. Good night and God bless you.